Welcome back to the podcast. You are listening to Stuff No One Told Us About Weight Loss. My name is Aaron and I'm here with Eloise, and today we are talking about accountability.
Yes, and the way we're talking about accountability is personal responsibility and taking personal responsibility for your life regardless of what's happening around you, rather than blaming outside things.
Yeah.
It can be a bit of a touchy topic sometimes.
It's sometimes a bit of a tough pill to swallow for a lot of us.
Ourselves included.
That's right, because we're constantly brought up from a young age to look for things to blame.
Yeah.
You know, whether it be at school, from parents, your work environment, whoever, is to like pass the buck.
Yeah.
You know, and put the blame onto something else or someone else. You know, we were late for work because of the traffic or whatever.
It's the society norm, so it's understandable that it's not necessarily our natural state for many of us.
Taking personal accountability is a massive step towards really taking back control at the end of the day of your own results, because you're taking responsibility for the actions that you do.
And that's why it's huge in weight loss. But beyond weight loss, it's really massive in your life.
Yeah.
And if you are someone who follows Gary Vee, he talks a lot about accountability being the key to happiness. And every time he starts talking about this, I start cheering in the background because I just think it's such a fantastic message, taking responsibility for your life. And it's really true that accountability does create happiness in your life. It's really difficult to be happy when you're stuck blaming everyone else. And there's a quote from him, and he says, "When you're accountable, when you take responsibility for things that go wrong, regardless of whether or not it's your fault, you'll feel in control. You won't feel helpless or feel like other people are controlling your life." And a lot of people are really scared to be accountable because they don't understand how being accountable is different from beating yourself up for your mistakes. So they default to blaming other people. And I just really love this because it really just explains, you know, why we're afraid to be accountable and also why accountability is so important.
That's right. And that point about making the distinction between being accountable versus beating yourself up for making mistakes. They're two very different things.
Exactly. And something that Gary also talks about is the fact that it's like beating yourself up is different from being disappointed. So he says that it's okay to be disappointed in a decision you made, or it's okay to feel like you weren't proud of the way that you acted. That's very different to beating yourself up and judging yourself for what you did. Yeah. And the difference between the two is, one, when you're beating yourself up and you're like, you know, I'm so terrible, why did I do that? How much do I suck? That's you sitting in the disappointment and dwelling on it.
Yeah.
You don't find solutions when you sit there and you dwell and you beat yourself up for it and you judge yourself. Whereas when you are accountable to yourself, you can go, okay, that did not go how I wanted it to go. I'm not really proud of the way I handled that. How can I learn from that? How can I now improve and do better next time? And that's the difference.
It's interesting because on that point of, you know, beating yourself up versus being accountable, you got to think about it like the conversation that you're having with yourself. On the one hand, if you're beating yourself up and you're just, you know, insulting yourself, you're shaming yourself, all of that sort of things, that's very like a reactive way of doing it. Yeah. And it's very similar to what kids do in a schoolyard, where they're name calling, they're putting others down. Whereas when you're taking responsibility and you recognize like, hey, that might not have been the best decision, and I'm a little bit disappointed in the results, but what did I learn from that? That's what an adult would do.
Yeah.
That's what someone who is really in control and coming at it from an objective perspective would say to you.
Exactly.
And that's how we want to talk to ourselves, is like that person, not the schoolyard bully who's like putting you down and telling you off all the time.
Yeah. And I think we all have that schoolyard bully in our head at some point, and it's about going, no, I'm not going to listen to them.
Yeah.
So going back to Gary Vee, he talks about two big reasons why a lot of us are afraid to take responsibility for our own life, and we sort of sit there and go, well, but that wasn't my fault, so why would I take accountability? Why shouldn't I just blame them? And I mean, the biggest reason for wanting to take accountability is that it will make you feel happier. So one of the reasons is that we're judging ourselves. That's why we're afraid to be accountable, because we think it's sort of like what we were just talking about, where we think that being accountable means beating ourselves up. So naturally we're afraid to do it. And the second reason is that we're afraid of other people's opinions. We're afraid that if we stand up and go, well, okay, I did that wrong, it was my fault, or I'm taking responsibility for this, we think that other people are going to judge us for that.
Yeah.
But the truth is, it's actually usually the opposite. When we sit there blaming and shaming and judging other people or outside circumstances, and we're constantly like, oh, I'm so busy, work's so stressful, this person said this to me, oh, the pandemic meant that I can't do this. Other people are more likely to judge you when you're in that blame game compared to when you're stepping up and taking responsibility and going, look, it's me. Here's how I now want to improve.
That's right. And I think one of the reasons behind that is because when you're playing the blame game, especially even if it's with yourself and others are hearing that, that instantly puts you in a bit of a social ranking system. And it puts you on the back foot when you're saying that to yourself or voicing those opinions. Whereas if you own up and take responsibility for it, you instantly jump to the status of someone who's a leader. Because someone who can demonstrate that they can have control over themselves and recognize where they're making mistakes and can make improvements, people look up to those people as a natural leader. They're like, well, they're in control of themselves. They have their shit together. I want to follow those people. And so being accountable and taking responsibility for things in your life doesn't mean that there's things outside of your control that aren't going to happen. Like, of course there are. There are going to be times when things happen to you and it is well outside of your control. And it is not your fault, and you don't need to take that on and say, like, I'm taking responsibility in the fact that someone ran into me with their car because they ran the red light. There are going to be times where things do happen to you. But the real difference is how we respond to the situation. So at the same time, like, something happened to us is just, it's an objective view. We can then always look at, well, what can I do in response to that? A really good example is the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. That is a really interesting book and a really good way to illustrate this point. Viktor Frankl was a prisoner throughout the Nazi Holocaust. And, you know, he was subjected to things that no one could even dream of in those prison camps. But he used that as an opportunity, and he said, they can't take away my own meaning, my desire to keep living. They can't take that away from me. If they can take that away from me, then all hope is gone.
And one of the things that he noticed as well when he was observing other people was the people who gave up and became a victim of their circumstances were the people who often died much sooner. Whereas the people who kept reminding themselves of their purpose, of what they were going to do when they got out, and they kept having this higher meaning to their life and a purpose to their life, they were able to take responsibility for their response to the situation. Even though objectively they were victims.
That's right.
And so that's just a really good example. None of us are in extreme situations like that. And so it's really important for us to maintain that perspective and go, okay, shit happens, but I always am in control of how I respond to that. I don't have to sit there and blame everything around me, even when it might technically be the fault of things around you. Blaming other things and other people, it only makes you feel worse. It doesn't actually help you move forward or help the situation at all.
That's right.
And the only difference is a change in your perspective.
I like the point. It never really fixes the problem or moves it forward. It just makes you feel worse.
Exactly. It's just something to come back to, and it's something I often come back to as well when I find myself, because we all find ourselves in that situation where we start to blame things or we start to sit there and mope around a bit. And I think that it's important to come back to that and just come back to, what am I in control of here? I'm always in control of my own thoughts and the way that I respond. So it's really important to remember that you can't keep waiting for outside things to change or for other people to change. There is no time where everyone will change in the way that we want them to. And so that's where you can come back to, how can I change myself? When you change yourself first, you're able to then create the life that you want and a life that's fulfilling and meaningful to you. In addition to Gary Vee, I also follow Brendon Burchard, and he also talks about personal responsibility and accountability. And if these two guys are talking about it, it means it's really important and really impactful in life.
Yeah.
Because both of them have really great perspectives on this stuff.
Yeah.
And Brendon actually separates personal responsibility into 5 areas. And I really love the way that he's outlined this. And so we're going to share it with you guys as well.
That's right. And so the first one that Brendon breaks down this into is our aim. What's our vision? What are our goals? Where are we moving towards in life? Because the fact is, if we don't intentionally choose that, it's going to be decided for us. So if we sit on that back foot, and as we've been speaking about, become a victim of our circumstances, the circumstances are going to shape where we ultimately end up.
Yeah.
Whereas if we put ourselves in the driver's seat and take responsibility, we are then in control of where we end up going.
Exactly.
It might take a little bit longer. You might go and hit some bumps along the way, but at the end of the day, like, you're in control.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be massive life goals, although it does apply to that as well. It can be something as simple as, how do I want my day to go?
Yeah.
What's my goal for this day? Do I want the circumstances around me, the traffic, the boss, the kids, to decide how I feel about my day? Or am I going to intentionally decide that? And am I going to set myself up for success? And am I going to show up in a way that I'm proud of?
Yeah.
That's what really matters, and that's what taking responsibility means. So the second area that Brendon talks about is our attention. And this is around, what are we focusing on? So are we focusing on positive things? Are we focusing on negative things? Are we being present with ourselves and present with other people? Or are we living in this perpetual state of distraction, which is where a lot of us are, to be honest? Scrolling social media, we're eating food, we're watching Netflix, and we're just distracting ourselves, and we're not being present with our lives.
That's right. And that's a huge thing, because if we're constantly in this state of distraction, we're not obviously going to be doing the things that we need to do. But it's just training the habit of becoming distracted and staying there. We're trying to escape the reality, and that's not helpful either.
Yeah, and an interesting point on that as well is, when we numb uncomfortable emotions, which is what we tend to do when we're living in this distracted state, we're numbing the discomfort. What we also do is we numb the joy.
Yeah.
So if you choose to numb one, you choose to numb both. If you then choose to experience joy, you have to also choose to experience the discomfort and the uncomfortable parts of life. That's what being present is. Being present isn't always being happy. It's acknowledging that there's both sides of life, and I'm going to experience both.
And so the third one is our attitude. So we always have the power to choose how we respond. And it's that whole classic case of reactive, proactive, the two different mindsets there. No matter what's happening around us, it's how we choose to show up.
Yeah.
You know, even though things are going bad, we're having a bad day, that next meeting rolls around, how do we choose? Like, what sort of attitude do we want to have and we want to bring to that situation?
Yeah, really similar to what we were talking about just previously as well. And it's that idea of, we will find what we look for.
Yeah.
So if we're looking for reasons to blame and to feel negative and to feel upset and angry, we're going to find them. But on the other hand, if we look for reasons to feel grateful or to feel happy, we're also going to find those. So choosing where you put your attention really makes a difference. So the fourth area of personal responsibility is our affections. And this is really talking about, how do we connect with people around us? How do we connect with the world around us? Are we constantly waiting for other people to make the first move, or for other people to do things for us? Are we judgmental? Are we living in the past? Are we closed off because maybe we had a bad experience? all of that is our affection. And when we do live in those negative states and we're closed off and we're judgmental and we're waiting for other people, that's us playing the blame game, essentially. It's not taking responsibility. So on the other side of the coin, when we take responsibility, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I'm responsible for how I choose to show up to other people and to the world around me. I'm choosing to be open, and I'm choosing to be giving, and I'm choosing to connect with people around me, regardless of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Rather than reacting to what other people do, we're being proactive with how we choose to show up.
Yeah, that's something I know for me, that's been something that I've really tried hard to work on, and it's something I'm still working on. You know, if I look at past versions of myself, I was very much reactive to what other people were doing, you know, and playing that blame game. Like it's just something that I think a lot of us struggle with from time to time, and that we all have it in our own ways. But yeah, for me, that's something that I'm still working on, is this particular one here.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, to an extent as well, we're all constantly working on all of them.
And the last one is our actions. So above all else, the actions that you choose to take each day will define where you end up ultimately. So your life right now is a result of the actions that you've taken previously. Whether you like where you're at right now or you're not satisfied where you're at right now, that is a direct result of the previous actions that you've taken.
Yeah. And I think it's important for us to take responsibility with where we are in life, because if we don't, we're shutting off that opportunity to move forward.
Yeah.
And to improve and to develop new habits that are going to serve where we really want to go.
Yeah. And I think like just on that point there, it's really banks on that saying of when's the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago. When's the second best time is right now. With this podcast in particular, you know, now that we've gone through each of these points, like being aware of it, like you can start today.
Yeah.
And that would be the best time, because the longer we stay in that victim mindset and we either distract ourselves or we're playing the blame game, like we're just prolonging the time that we could be actually making a difference for ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're just putting it off. And as you all know, we don't get the time back. Like at the end of the day, there's going to be a time when you look back and you go, I have no more time left.
Yeah, or you won't get a chance to look back because your time ran out.
That's right. So we want to try and be aware of this and act in a way where we're actually trying to change these things and take responsibility. That's the fastest way we can do that.
Yeah. And again, like everything we've spoken about in this episode, it's about taking responsibility from a place of doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
So you're taking responsibility because you know that's the best way for you to live a life you're proud of. Taking responsibility because that's the best way to look after yourself. Because the best form of self-care, in my opinion, is taking responsibility, because it means you're saying, hey, I'm choosing to show up for myself.
Yeah.
I'm choosing to choose how I respond and to choose how I live my life. That to me is the ultimate form of self-care.
So guys, we hope that you got some really good information out of today's episode. It was pretty jam-packed with a lot of insightful things from both Gary Vee and from Brendan. So we hope that you, again, got some really, really great takeaways. If you want to find out more about what these guys do, highly recommend checking them both out. Brendan Burchard and Gary Vee. They both have some really, really good content around this, specifically taking responsibility and taking accountability for yourself.
Yeah, and they're both guys who've had a massive impact on my life in particular, but also Aaron's life, and a lot of the things that we teach are inspired by things that we've learned from those two guys. So definitely worth checking them out. And yeah, a lot of the lessons that we've spoken about in this episode as well have really been life-changing for us. And that's why we're really excited to share these lessons with you as well.
That's right. That's right. So guys, once again, thank you so much for listening, and we will both see you next time.